I don't know what is in the works there. I did want to just clarify something because personally, Mayim Bialik was my favorite of the guest hosts. And I got a bunch of emails from listeners telling me she was an anti-vaxxer, and I was like, oh dear God. So I started doing some research. So she wrote a book like 10 years ago called Beyond the Sling, and said she hadn't received a vaccination in 30 years. Now, this was 9 years ago. She has since come out and expressed like, hey, I am fully vaccinated, I got both COVID shots, and she says she plans to get the flu shot this fall. So she's not an anti-vaxxer. Her opinion has changed, particularly during the pandemic. Okay. So I did just want to mention that. Speaking of COVID, Hillary Duff, she admitted on Instagram this week she has contracted the Delta variant. So if you're curious to see what COVID looks like in someone who's fully vaxxed, you can just check out her Insta story. She's been sharing everything. She lost her sense of smell and taste, some sinus pressure, brain fog, really bad headaches. Said she's really grateful she was vaccinated, or it could have been much worse. She's holed up at home recovering. She is involved in Hulu's How I Met Your Mother reboot. Remember, they're making How I Met Your Father. So she's going to be the lead actress. We still don't have a release date for that. Trying to find one. All we know is that Hulu ordered 10 episodes for the first season. I don't know if they've started production, but if they did, presumably they would have had to stop because their leading lady has COVID right now.
That's how that works, yeah.
But she appears to be doing okay. I did also want to mention CTV sent out a note today. They had to make some fall programming changes, and you can blame Justin Trudeau. So because of the election on September 20th, that was supposed to be sort of the start of the fall primetime season. So everything had to get pushed. So The Big Leap is going to premiere on Tuesday instead, and then it'll go into its usual Monday slot. Bob Hart's Abishola back for a third season. They've bumped it by a week to the 27th. And Jan is going to also be bumped by a week to the 27th. So Justin Trudeau ruining everything for CTV as usual. And I checked, there's a Caitlyn Jenner documentary that's coming out tonight on Netflix.
Oh, hold on, let me make a note here. I'll make sure I don't watch that. Hang on. Yep.
So it's called Untold, the Caitlyn Jenner story. I don't know how much it's going to include. If it's going to include her run for politics now, or if it's just going to look at her journey, I don't know, but it comes out at midnight tonight if that's of interest to you. Also, over the weekend, they added a movie I hadn't seen when it came out, and I only saw it this weekend because it was on Netflix, Rocket Man, the Elton John biopic. For whatever reason, I just never saw it. I'd always meant to, and I never did. It's a really good movie.
Yeah,
like, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So if you have a few minutes or a few hours, check out Rocket Man. It's on Netflix now. Aaron, you, I know, have been recommending The White Lotus, which is on Crave. Season 1 is done, so you can check that out. That's with Connie Britton, and I am a huge fan of hers.
Yeah, me too. From all the way back from Nashville, from Dear John, whatever it was. I love her.
Friday Night Lights, Tammy Taylor. She was so good in that show. Everything she does, she's spectacular, and she has the best hair. Like, if I could have any Hollywood celebrity's hair, I would want Connie Britton's hair.
That's
always
good
looks
to know.
flawless.
Okay. I should mention, you mentioned Caitlyn Jenner. So Caitlyn Jenner running for governor of California. There's a recall vote in California because you're allowed to do that in California. You can try to recall a judge, a governor, whatever. I heard her talking about this on US TV. Ask me how many people are on the ballot for their recall of the governor who would like to be governor.
How many people are on the ballot?
65.
Oh.
65 people, including one who said, I'm always curious. I've always been curious about how government works. He's running for governor. So this ought to be fun.
The incumbent is Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom, who was very popular
right?
and probably still is enough. I guess at one point people decided they didn't like what he was doing over COVID. They put his name on. They imagine he will win. But just the fact that people who have no idea what they're doing, as evidenced by the fact that I really wonder how government works, are on the ballot, is absolutely insane. Robin, thank you. We're going to take our break for news. When we come back after 3 o'clock, one of the issues that hasn't gotten that much play yet in the federal election or the run-up, the campaign, is housing. So we're going to talk about what that's all about and why it should be or could be a big issue and which party maybe has the best ideas when we talk to Jeff Morrison from the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association right after news.
Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall. Brought to you by Dormez-vous. Mix and match at Dormez-vous is back. So whatever your sleep style, our sleep experts will match you to the sleep essentials you need. We're fully stocked and ready for quick delivery.
Jeep, you know the name. And if you own one, well, you already know where this is going. Because a Jeep isn't like anything else. Never has been. We're different. The square peg in a round hole type. There's only one family and one community quite like ours. Get up to 10% off MSRP on select Jeep models. up to $2,000 in loyalty cash for select owners during Jeep season. Ready for adventure? See your Jeep dealer for details.
Are you the type to check the door 3 times to make sure it's locked? Do you worry about your packages being stolen? Rest easy thanks to TELUS Smart Home. Lock your doors, keep an eye out for packages, and much more right from your smartphone. A professional monitoring system watches over your home 24/7, whether you're there or not. Enjoy unparalleled peace of mind for just $32 a month when bundled with TELUS Mobility, and get 3 months for $0 when you sign up for an eligible smart home security plan. Visit TELUS.com/yourhome or stop by one of our stores.
You're listening to the Voice of Montreal. News, talk radio, CJAD 800, and iHeart radio station.
This newscast brought to you by Guaranteed Industries. Keep cool with an air conditioning maintenance visit from Guaranteed Industries. Call 514-342-3400.
It's 3 o'clock. I'm Jason Mayoff with a CTV News update. Hot and humid again today. It's 29 downtown, but it feels like 37. Weather details in minutes. Here's what's making news right now. State of emergency in Montreal is about to end. How much more likely are you to end up in hospital if you don't get vaccinated? And the FDA in the U.S. has now fully approved Pfizer. With the latest from the CJAD 800 Traffic Center, here's Lauren Glazer.
We are seeing a pretty slow drive for the westbound side of the Met. Starts Langelier now back to the DeCarry interchange as well. A lot of volume for northbound Laurentian between St. Elsiar and 640. Difficult drive, too, for southbound Laurentian, St. Sever, all the way but down to the Port du Nord. Maybe hop onto the 117 to save a little bit of time. Northbound 13 delays, 2 from ahead of the T-Can runs to Henri Bourassa, and the 344 onto the 640 for southbound 13. That's a slow drive, too, between St. Martin and the Bisson Bridge. Off and on volume on the westbound side of the 20. It starts Turcotte now back to Norman, and flat about 20 minutes between Il Perrot and Doriel. 50 or over? What are you waiting for? Ask your pharmacist today if helping prevent pneumococcal pneumonia with the Prevnar 13 vaccine is right for you. Learn more at Prevnar.ca. Traffic and transit every 15 minutes on CJAD 800. Your next report at 3:15.
Montreal has decided that after nearly a year and a half, it doesn't need to renew its state of emergency. We'll be moving instead to alert mode as of Friday. Officials made the decision based on the high vaccination rate and the vaccination passport, which comes into effect next week. Quebec says there were 376 new... The Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. has given full approval now to the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine.
Acting FDA Commissioner Janet Woodcock says the public can be, in her words, very confident the Pfizer vaccine meets high standards for safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality. According to Pfizer, the U.S. becomes the first country to fully approve its shot. The FDA's approval may spur more vaccine mandates by companies, universities, and local governments. A recent poll by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research shows nearly 6 in 10 Americans favor requiring people to be fully vaccinated to travel on airplanes or attend crowded public events. Mike Hempton, Washington.
Well, despite being on the campaign trail, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will attend tomorrow's emergency G7 meeting. It was called by the UK's Boris Johnson to talk about Afghanistan. Johnson wants to ask U.S. President Joe Biden to keep American troops in Kabul past the August 31st pullout date.
No U.S. presence at the airport would mean the end of the Kabul evacuation for the other NATO members. UK Defence Minister James Heaton.
There is a hard reality that there would be no international airlift without the way that the United States are underpinning it.
Britain is urging the U.S. to extend its effort in Kabul beyond the current deadline. Prime Minister Boris Johnson plans to press President Biden on that at an emergency meeting of G7 leaders on Tuesday. If agreed, then it's up to the Taliban to make the final call. Tom Rivers, ABC News, London.
And New York Governor Andrew Cuomo gave one final parting shot in his farewell speech.
On his last day in office, Governor Andrew Cuomo denounced the sexual harassment allegations and the investigative report that preceded his resignation.
The Attorney General's report was designed to be a political firecracker.
In a recorded farewell address, he sought to establish a legacy beyond what drove him from office.
No governor in the nation has passed more progressive measures than I have.
Cuomo said his successor, Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, will step up to the challenge when she becomes the state's first female governor after midnight. Aaron Katursky, ABC News, New York.
Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CJAD 800. Your Dormez Weather Center forecast. A heat warning is still in effect. Mainly cloudy today, the high 30 degrees, and humid. Mainly cloudy with a chance of showers tonight, the low 22. And sunshine tomorrow, the high 31, the humidex 38. It's 29 downtown, but it feels like 37. For all the news during the day, stream us on your smart speaker. Just say play CJAD 800. Your next CTV News update is at 3:30.
Come along for the ride and buckle up. Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall, Montreal.
Now, although I have a feeling this will get talked about more and more as we get closer to Election Day on the 20th of September, is housing in this country. Yes, we've heard a lot about affordable housing, the lack of it. I think all the parties have made pledges to do more. How realistic they are, that's one thing. And whether they even get done is another thing, right? You can promise to build as many as you can, and then 4 years later, you've only, maybe done a fraction of what you'd originally promised, and we move on to the next election, and there are promises made all over again. But we do know that this particular government, this Liberal government, has not been able to do much to stop the rising cost of housing in this country, which is something that's also going to come into focus, I would guess, over the next few weeks. So whether it's you trying to buy your first home or even find a decent, affordable apartment to rent, there's no question the cost of housing has gone kind of crazy. It's astronomical in Canadian cities. Jeff Morrison is Executive Director of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. He's on the line right now. Mr. Morrison, it is an issue. We recognize it's an issue. Is it not getting talked enough about?
Well, we hope over the duration of the campaign that, as you said, more parties and more candidates will in fact talk about it. To date, 4 of the 5 major parties have released platforms, or 3 of them have. I think the Greens are releasing in the next day or two. There are housing commitments contained in all of the platforms released thus far. They're somewhat different. Each of the parties has a different set of approaches on how to deal with this housing crisis in Canada. But what we really hope is that whomever forms the next government is going to prioritize this issue, because, as you correctly said in your introduction, this has become a crisis. It doesn't frankly matter where you are on the housing spectrum. There are crisis points along it, and it's something that touches everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your income. You fall somewhere on the housing spectrum. And so given the challenges it faces, we need the next government to prioritize this issue both in terms of policy and its funding approaches.
All right, well, let's talk about a couple of different areas here. And I'll bring up something that I saw or heard the other day from Jagmeet Singh. This idea, forget about, for just a second, the idea of, the affordability of buying a home. He was in Toronto and talking about, and I guess it's the hottest rental market, or one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive in the country, about actually being able to do something with respect to those high rents. And he talked about, I think it was a $5,000 a dispensation, if you will, to someone who tried to rent a place, and the government would give you back that money at the end of the year? Would it be a credit? How would that work? Do you know?
Yeah, so in fact, in the 2017 National Housing Strategy that the Liberals introduced, this type of program was actually already introduced. It's called the Canada Housing Benefit, and it's essentially what happened was over the couple years beyond 2017, the federal government negotiated one-on-one agreements with each province. The feds essentially provided funding to each province and allowed the province to implement their own version of what essentially a rental benefit or a rental subsidy would look like. So in each province, it does look a little different. In some cases, it aligns with an existing provincial rent subsidy program. When the initial announcement was made back in 2017, the estimated amount of this was about $2,000 for eligible recipients. As you said, Mr. Singh is talking about $5,000. So, we would wait to see what the details are. But if it were to be similar to what's already in place, it would essentially be sort of a federal-provincial arrangement.
Is there any proof that it would work or has worked up until now?
It's a bit early. The agreements with the provinces, for the most part, have only been in place less than a year. There are a couple provinces where it's been in place a little longer, but the jury is still out a bit in terms of, if this is an effective approach. Some of the, academic studies have suggested that it is effective because it essentially is money that is meant to be directly, that goes directly to one's rent. But there is an inflationary impact or risk that if, landlords know that tenants are receiving this extra funding, will they, jack up rents to compensate for that? And that's a bit of a challenge. And again, that's where the jury is still somewhat out, and we're still waiting to see the impact of these programs.
All right, so let's move on to housing then, and not talk about rent, but this idea of buying that first home. We know the Liberal government put in some extra provisions as far as tightening up mortgage rules, which they thought might cool markets down. I don't think that's worked. It's also, from what I understand, made it even more difficult for some people to be able to afford that first home, right?
Yeah, that's, I think, the reference to the stress test. So that's that policy that the federal government has in place that makes sure that people who are trying to get a mortgage can actually afford an increase in the mortgage payments if interest rates were to rise by a certain percentage. Like most policies, there are pros and cons to it. But I think there's no question, to your point, that, of course, housing prices have gone up, quite significantly. 20% increase from June to June, year over year, this past year. But we also can't forget that for many people in this country, the private market, is simply unaffordable at the best of times. We also need to see policies and programs for those folks at the lower income scale, and of course, those 235,000 Canadians who experience homelessness every year. We can't forget about them. So, yes, housing prices themselves are important, but, sort of taking that more holistic view of the housing spectrum, and I think what we're looking for are parties to address that whole spectrum approach.
Right, which would be my next question with respect to what are you asking, whatever government ends up, whatever party ends up forming that government, what are you asking be done with respect to housing?
Yeah, so we've created a coalition called Vote Housing. It has 6 key asks. So a couple of those asks, first of all, to create at least 300,000 new units of affordable housing. And that seems like a lot, but, we've seen other jurisdictions put in place similar levels, so it is completely doable. In their throne speech last year, the Liberals committed, they made a promise to eliminate chronic homelessness in Canada, but they developed no plan, no strategy on how to do that. So that's what we're looking for as a strategy. We know urban Indigenous peoples face the highest rates of housing inequality. So we're looking for something that the Liberals promised to do in 2019, but still have not, which is to implement an urban Indigenous program. So there's a number of things that can be done. And again, we're looking for the party that really has the most robust set of policies to deal with the housing spectrum, the housing crisis across the spectrum.
So I'm curious, from what I understand as well, the idea, part of the reason why we're seeing prices go up the way they are, number one, there's foreign investment here, and I know parties have different plans for how to curb that, but also the idea that there is simply a matter of overwhelming demand and sort of limited supply. How does that get changed?
Yeah, there's no question. Supply is a key concern right now, and that's something that really cross-cuts across the spectrum. So it doesn't matter if it's, supply of affordable housing, supply of purpose-built rental housing, supply of private housing. Supply is a key challenge across. There are tools that could be put in place to address that. Again, some of the parties have talked about that and put forth solutions, tax on vacant properties, preventing foreign buyers from picking up real estate. Something, too, that we've talked about as one of those 6 key priorities I mentioned is an aspect called financialization. This is the notion that you get these large multinational corporations or REITs that come in and buy kind of lower income housing, renovate it, and then put it back on the market for much higher rents. That concept of retroviction as well. This is something that we need to put an end to, because this is taking a lot of supply of affordable housing off the market and really putting it into that more higher end rental market income. So that's something we need to stop. So yeah, there's definitely a suite of policies that we need to see put in place if we're really serious about increasing supply and curbing demand.
You know, you mentioned the foreign buyer situation where people just come in, swoop in, buy it, and hope to flip their property later. And as I said, I know the parties, they have various plans. If I read right, it may have been the NDP, suggesting a 20% tax. Some are saying 1%. They're talking 20%, which seems even, I mean, obviously more extreme. Do you think that makes a difference? Will that actually dissuade enough foreign buyers and make more homes available to Canadians?
It's possible. A similar tax has been put in place in British Columbia. Not to that level, but the tax is there. And some of the early evidence suggests that it has served as a bit of a dissuader from foreign buyers coming in and taking some of those properties. So, you know, I think a couple of these suggestions that have been proposed and...